All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. We're looking at something incredibly fascinating, how a single word, literally just the choice between calling an animal wildlife or livestock, is completely reshaping ecology, politics, and indigenous sovereignty out in Wyoming. It's a prime example of how a simple legal definition can, quite literally, alter the physical landscape around us.
To get a handle on this, we've got a great roadmap ahead. We're going to cover the return to Wind River, defining wildlife versus livestock, the history of the herds, climate and ecological impacts, the politics of buffalo management, and finally, sovereignty and reconnection.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, the return to Wind River. To really set the stage here, I want you to picture Jason Baldus, the executive director of the Wind River Tribal Buffalo Initiative. Not long ago, he drove a trailer full of 11 young buffalo down a dusty sagebrush highway all the way from Colorado back to the Wind River Reservation. This incredible physical act of bringing them back perfectly captures the core philosophy behind a groundbreaking vote by the Eastern Shoshone to officially classify buffalo as wildlife, not livestock. As Jason puts it, bringing the buffalo back is about our relationship with them, not domination over them.
And you know, thanks to efforts just like his, these tribal herds are steadily growing. Right now, the Eastern Shoshone manage 118 buffalo, and the Northern Arapaho, who share the exact same land base, manage 97. So that brings the total up to 215. And because they share that land, the Northern Arapaho are actually expected to hold a very similar vote soon. But you might be wondering, why does this specific vote matter so much?
Well, that brings us to Section 2. Defining wildlife versus livestock and why that difference is everything. Okay, so the crucial piece of the puzzle here is understanding this legal and semantic difference. Broadly speaking, wildlife refers to living organisms that just exist outside of direct human control. They aren't selectively bred or domesticated. Treating these massive animals like elk or deer, rather than cattle, changes the whole game. Now, quick side note, scientists technically call these guys bison, wild ungulates with hooves. But tribes and locals almost always say buffalo. Whatever you call them, though, this legal distinction is exactly what dictates how they're allowed to live on the land. Just look at the sharp contrast between these two paradigms. On one side, you've got the Western livestock model. This is very economically focused. Animals are seen as products, managed and fenced in for the meat industry. But on the flip side, you have the wildlife paradigm championed by the tribes. This approach is all about ecological health, letting the animals roam totally free and restoring a deep historical cultural connection. It is a fundamental shift in how we interact with the natural world.
Let's move on to Section 3, the history of the herds. And honestly, it is a staggering timeline.
When you look at the historical numbers, the drop-off is absolutely dramatic. Back in 1870, we're talking about 8 million buffalo roaming the United States. Just 20 years later, by the 1890s, there were fewer than 500 left. I mean, it's a catastrophic crash. This was driven by Western expansion, overhunting, habitat destruction, and intentional government policies designed to eradicate indigenous food supplies. Thankfully today, we are seeing a slow but steady recovery, with roughly 20,000 wild plains bison in North America, much like the ones returning to Wind River. But here is a really important caveat. Today, most buffalo actually live in private operations raised for the meat industry. Just look at the scale of things right now. In 2023, around 85,000 bison were processed for meat in the U.S. Now, compare that to 36 million head of cattle. So even with the recovery, the buffalo's footprint is just a tiny, tiny fraction of the massive cattle industry.
And if we zoom out even further to a global scale, the data is just mind-blowing. Studies show that if you were to weigh every single piece of livestock in the world, they would be an astonishing 30 times heavier than all the wildlife on Earth combined. The sheer scale of livestock on our planet is completely dominant, which perfectly sets up our next big topic.
Section 4. Climate and ecological impacts.
Right now, Wyoming is dealing with some intense environmental challenges: shrinking glaciers, serious droughts, and wildfires. Now, it's true that both cattle and buffalo emit methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas, but how they behave on the actual land is totally different. Studies show cattle spend about 50% of their time grazing. They tend to just hang out near water sources, and when they're all bunched up together, they can cause soil erosion and even mess with carbon absorption. Buffalo, they only graze about 25% of the time. They're constantly on the move across the plains, and they munch on a much wider variety of grasses. So the big takeaway here is that by allowing buffalo to roam freely as wildlife, instead of fencing them in, they can actively restore the rangeland. Their natural habits bolster biodiversity, they promote drought resistance, and they can literally help store carbon in the ecosystem.
Now, to be fair, Wyoming wildlife officials do point out that this requires proper management, right? Because too many animals of any kind in one area can eventually lead to rangeland degradation.
Which leads us straight into Section 5, the politics of buffalo management. And yes, there is a lot of friction here.
One of the biggest flashpoints causing this political friction is a disease called brucellosis. We're seeing two very distinct perspectives here. On one side, you have ranchers and tribal cattle owners who are super concerned about this disease. They're advocating for strict separation between buffalo and cattle to protect their livelihoods, which makes total sense from an agricultural standpoint. But on the other side, you've got National Park Service data pointing out that there hasn't been a single recorded case of bison to cattle transmission in the wild.
This exact tension is actually playing out right now around Yellowstone National Park. Get this, Montana has literally sued the National Park Service over their buffalo management plan. State officials are worried about the potential negative effects of letting a growing herd roam freely outside park boundaries, and agricultural groups like the Montana Stock Growers Association are pushing for stricter population controls and increased tribal hunting. Meanwhile, you've got the state of Wyoming issuing around 70 buffalo hunting tags a year, classifying the animals as either livestock or wildlife, depending on the specific location and herd. It is a highly complex situation.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Sovereignty and Reconnection.
To really grasp this, we have to look at the legal foundation. Back in 2019, a U.S. Supreme Court case called Herrera v. Wyoming ruled in favor of treaty-protected hunting rights within the state. With those treaty rights firmly upheld, the Wind River tribes are actively exercising their sovereignty. By officially classifying buffalo as wildlife, they are taking charge on their own homelands, setting their own wildlife management strategies, and creating their own hunting regulations.
And all of this builds toward an incredible ultimate vision. Jason Baldez explicitly rejects the word ranch for his initiative. This isn't about raising livestock for profit. The goal is to establish food sovereignty and nutrition, restore deep cultural and ceremonial identity, and purchase properties so these herds can truly be free roaming. Eventually, the vision is to hunt buffalo just like any other wild game, returning to a balanced dynamic that existed long before settler contact.
So we're going to wrap up with a pretty provocative question. Will reclassifying buffalo as wildlife ultimately restore the ecological balance of the plains, or will invisible political boundaries keep them boxed in? It really leaves us wondering if this single shift in terminology can truly heal centuries of ecological and cultural trauma, or if our modern agricultural landscape is just set in stone at this point. Anyway, I hope this explainer gave you a clear, structured look into a truly transformative issue. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.